I know I have it here.
Shouldn't we open the meeting and accept the minutes of the last meeting first?
Well, we can do that in public session. So I would agree with you, Frank. We probably
Yeah, and
should.
then
So
from that session, we go over to closed session.
that sounds good to me,
Right, you are
since
now
that is
being
on the
recorded.
agenda. I would entertain any motion with respect to the minutes.
Make a motion that we accept them as read.
Second.
Okay. And is there any discussion at all?
No.
None. Nope.
Okay, then we'll have our roll call vote. Frank? To accept the minutes as prepared?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Sean?
Yes.
And I do as well, so it's unanimous. And I think that that largely concludes the portion of the meeting that we can conduct publicly. And although I just had the language in front of me 5 minutes ago, I can't find it now. Let me try to bring it up once again. It was in a, it's actually in the, no, it's not in the meeting agenda. Where did I have it? Oh, here we go. So pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A8, I'm going to invite a motion with respect to concluding the public portion of our meeting and going to executive session for the purpose of discussing applicants for employment and the preliminary screening of those applications, since to do so in public session would be detrimental to the town's interest in securing qualified candidates. So is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
I'll second it.
All right, thank you both. And I'll do a roll call vote. Frank?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
And I concur, so it is unanimous. So we will now close the public session of our meeting, and we will go to executive session. Kim, if you could help us to assure that there is no member of the public present at this time?
Member of the public is present, and I will stop the recording.
Okay.
Okay. You're now
Thank
being
you. So we've concluded our executive session, and we're returning to public session for the purpose of discussing a little further the process in the selection of our town council clerk. I think that we do need to consider exactly how we're selecting the committee going forward. In other words, I think what we had previously discussed was having maybe a 3-member committee to actually conduct interviews. So does that still seem appropriate, just for discussion purposes, each of you?
It does for me.
Yeah, it does for me.
All right. Now, is it the case that this 3-member committee is making the final determination as to selection of the candidate?
No, I think
Okay.
that they, correct me if I'm wrong, but they would be responsible for
A
making
recommendation?
their recommendation. And then the council
To
as
the
a
council.
whole has to agree to, hire, extend an offer. So
Yep.
that final decision has to go to a vote for all of us. What we
Okay.
want to do is get the interview group to bring it down to one person
Yeah.
that we extend the offer to. And then from there, if they accept it, great. If they don't, then if you've got 3, you've got a second candidate, because as Kim will attest, you're not batting 1,000 on offers either.
Right. So the council makes the final determination, but the council as a whole, as a body, is not going to conduct an interview. per se.
Correct.
All
Correct.
right. So presumably.
What I'd suggest doing is, so Kim, when we go in, well, when we go in to make the final determination of who we're going to extend an offer to, is that done in executive session or is that done in regular meeting?
If you're going to discuss the merit of whether or not you want to do that, make the offer, you can do that in executive session.
Yeah.
That should not be done in open session at all. And if to the extent there'll be questions, that
Yep.
needs to be coordinated.
So I think, having, I don't know about Ann, but having, the two councils in there that did the interviews to discuss the merits, would be appropriate. And then after that executive session would be coming out with a decision if we're going to, move forward on an offer. So that's the way I envision it. Just for efficiencies, both for the potential candidates as well as the people doing the interviews. And from Ann's perspective, if she just sent Fred, you or Matt, her thoughts on all three, that's fine as well. I mean, I think that could be just some input, but we're ultimately going to make the final decision as a council.
So,
Did you all want our office to be involved with the interviews or no?
No, I think we can do it. We can coordinate it.
Gonna give, you have some sort of a thing that you follow during your interviews.
Yes, we
Maybe
have to
people
keep,
on the committee should have an opportunity to look at that.
Yeah,
to prepare
I would agree with
themselves
that.
prior to the actual interviews.
Okay.
Yeah, so that they can keep in line. They can basically know, and don't leave stuff out sometimes. Just didn't say later on. Say, oh, I should have said that. I should have asked that question.
well, my more concern is about the legal implications of asking questions when you haven't done it before.
Yep. No. If that's what you're asking, yes. I didn't want to think that you guys had to do interviews themselves. Is probably my point. So, I mean, obviously, Fred, if you're willing to do it, I'm assuming Matt is, but you may want, one of us can reach out to him. But again, and then before Ann had left, I had a conversation with her, and she said she'd be more than willing to interview and, give the day in the life as well, which can also help on the other end of the spectrum to Frank's earlier point about, the different hours potentially at times and things of that nature. So,
and see, one of the other points, if you don't mind me cutting in, is Ann is still a town employee. So we're not bringing
Right.
somebody from outside to be part of this interview.
Mhm.
We have the president of the council, we have the chairman of this committee, and we have another town employee who formerly had the position.
Yeah.
Now it just melds together and says, well, how can you go wrong?
well, yeah. And in fairness too, when I was a hiring manager, I would have someone on my team sit down with a potential interviewee. They understood the parameters of what they could ask, but I probably put them there more for answering questions. But that was always, that was, like I said, that was always a good thing too, because sometimes that person who's interviewing may walk out with a better appreciation or maybe a little bit of a different perspective if they've got someone who's had the job.
So, yeah, that is part of of the town's process. Always, again, it is important that the people are evaluating us as well. They can't ask good questions if they don't understand the role completely.
so Kim, let me ask you this. Would it be something possible to do if, for example, if the committee were to consist of Matt and myself, for example? I can't.
I think someone else
I'll
wants
try to
in
not
too.
subject you to my dog barking.
No, Fred, I
may
think
not
you
be able
better
to get
invite
away.
the dog in too, or the dog's going to have a huge issue right there. I hear it.
Hold on 1 minute. I'll try to help this out. Excuse me a moment.
2-minute recess.
Good, I need it.
Hold on, I'm just gonna
Kim, in other words, if we have a three-person committee, as we've been discussing, is it possible then for someone from your office to join those interview sessions? Not for the purpose of actually engaging in the interview process, but kind of as a safeguard, you might say. In other
Absolutely.
words, to ensure that, you know, the interviewers are not, you know, transgressing, you know, in any respect as to improper questioning, or, you know, because I would agree that, you know, it would be relatively easy for many of us to inadvertently ask a question that might have adverse consequences.
Oh, absolutely. That's what we do every day. So we're happy to be helpful.
Well, if that were the case, then let me ask the counselors, how do you feel about that? A three-person committee actually engaging in the discussion and conducting the interview, and someone from the town administration to kind of help us stay within the guardrails.
Not a fan. I've said that's an interview panel. I'm not a fan of those.
We already discussed all the normal procedures that they use when they're interviewing people. And like I said, we'll get those procedures to the interviewers, and in there kind of should have some guidelines. It's not going to spell out every one, but it should have some kind of guidelines as to types of questions they can ask and not ask.
Okay, so then Kim, if that's the case, what about the matrix that that you've discussed before? Is that something in a form that can simply be furnished to us, that we could kind of use as a study guide before the actual conducting of interviews?
Yeah.
Or
Absolutely.
I'd even suggest this, Frank. I mean, Fred, if at all possible, is to get all three of the interviewers along with Kim and on a call similar to this. Kim can get out all the parameters, talk through best practices, and then after that, it becomes a coordination of getting the candidates in front of the interviewees. That would be my suggestion.
Oh, okay. I actually, I like that. I think that's more helpful. So why don't we try to arrange then, first of all, we'll nail down the committee that we think is a committee of three, Matt, Ann, and myself. Just to finalize that point, Kim, let me ask you, as Frank has pointed out, Ann is still an employee of the town, and I think she could provide to us a really invaluable, you know, addition to this committee. And I suspect she would make herself available and would be willing to do that. Is there any concern otherwise that, you know, from the town standpoint, as to having the predecessor in this position, who now works for the town, but in other capacity, having that person in effect be part of the interview committee?
So we generally don't have them be part of the committee. We have them work much like Sean had described. We may have them come in and give information to the candidate, but they are generally not part of the committee. But this is your hire. You can do as you wish to do.
Okay, well, so given that, and if we were trying to be consistent with the town's practice, we would have in effect a two-person committee, right? Because we'd have Matt and myself as chairman of this committee, making in a decision-making role, and would be there as a support person to help identify the really relevant, you know, criteria, and kind of really hone in on questions that, you know, we might not ask, or provide information that we can't provide about the job. What does the committee think about that? Is is it unreasonable to have simply a two-person committee in a decision-making role, since
You may run
we
into
would
a
like it to,
problem.
but, you know, first of all, there's a possibility of deadlock, right?
Yeah, that's the problem I was just going to talk about. You could end up, and anytime you have just two people looking at, in this case, three people, okay, you could end up with a deadlock. I want that one, you want that one. How are we going to settle this? You know?
Right.
And if that third person is the person who will be involved in the whole interview and conversation, and then that could be the person that breaks the deadlock.
Well, any thoughts about a third person? If we don't count Ann as a decision maker?
Well, why couldn't we count Ann as a decision maker for a recommendation? They're not the ultimate decision makers. Don't
No,
forget that.
they're only a recommendation.
They're only a recommendation. So why not give her the opportunity? What would be the negative part of that? I mean, it's not very often that you can get the former person to be directly involved in recommending his or her successor. So I would take full advantage of giving her input in regards to a recommended candidate for the council to consider hiring. That's my opinion.
Okay. Kim, do you see any particular flaw there that we have to really be concerned about, or can we make that work?
It's not a flaw. It's just not something that we normally do because we evaluate each of the positions. You're not going to get Ann, so if you're looking for her, or she would, and I'm talking about Ann, who's wonderful, but what happens if the person's not exactly it's hard when it's your job, your former job. You want it to continue kind of like you. And it's not for, I don't think anything's necessarily wrong with it, but it's harder for you when you're stepping away from it. I think Ann is wonderful. If I were looking for someone, and I did the job before Ann, so I want it done the way I remember doing it. So, but again, this is your role. However you want to construct it, it's up to you to do. But that just as a consideration, it's not something that we often have.
Well,
and also it's also what she would be one of three. So
right.
Mm-hmm.
I understand. I absolutely understand what Kim's saying, but I have confidence that Ann will go into it. You know, she's got an HR background as well, understanding that we're not looking for Ann. We're looking for someone who can do the job on a go forward basis. So I don't have any reservations whatsoever. And again, I'm only one of three.
I agree with you.
Okay. Well, I'm willing to, concur in that regard. I mean, I think that if the committee feels that a three-person committee, one member being Ann, to have decision-making power in terms of recommending to the council a final candidate, then I think that's fine. I think that we're going to, let's just recap. So we're going to have a meeting of this committee, the three of us, for the purpose of gaining insight into the matrix that Kim has discussed, and basically to have a little kind of mini training session in interviewing candidates, so that we don't sidestep anything.
But it'd be the three of us. You'd want Matt here.
We'll have Matt here as well then,
and also Ann.
Or were you talking about you, Ann, and Matt as the three of us? Which three of us are you talking about?
Well, no, I think we can have another meeting. We can all be here.
Yep.
I'll be very interested in the way that the town does it, because I've seen it other ways and just very curious.
Mm-hmm.
But my envision is after that meeting, then the interview process starts.
Agreed. All right. Sounds good.
All right, so we need to arrange a meeting for the three of us, together with Kim, so that's 4, and Matt and Ann.
Yep.
Okay, that's obviously going to be a public session because we're talking about process. Okay, so we just need to arrange and schedule that meeting. I think,
Okay, so just so I'm clear, that's going to be public, so I'm not going to have the questions that I would normally give for that
Right, right, you
session
can't-
because it would be published.
You can't
Okay.
do that. Public. You gotta do similar to what we did tonight.
Let's take a step back. So I don't think, and we can get clarification that, Fred, if it was you and Matt and Ann and Kim, just to talk about the process of the interview, like you're not talking about candidates, you're not about that. I don't think that has to be a public,
Right,
that doesn't have to be a public meeting. So you can set up just a quick Zoom. And,
Right.
you know, to Kim's point, you can talk about everything in depth because it's not from there. So that would be my approach to that. And then from there, if there's a need for us to get back together, obviously we can, but I don't think we need to get involved in that. So we don't have to have it as a public meeting.
okay, so I'm agreeable to that. A meeting for Matt, Ann, and myself.
It could be considered a training session rather than meeting.
Well,
yeah,
right,
Whether
but-
it doesn't even have, it can be a meeting
Yeah,
because
Right.
nobody's on a committee
right.
together, right?
okay.
Okay, all right, so that meeting will take place. We'll have to arrange for that. And then we need to arrange for a meeting with the candidates for the interview committee. Right? So how
So
could that be done, Ann, if we're
So
looking for what?
generally that's done through us because you don't know the names of the candidates or if they're male or female until they come walking through the door.
That's right.
That's generally,
Okay,
but if you,
okay. So stage 2 is the meeting that your office will arrange for the interview committee of 3 and the candidates. Okay,
yeah, I think at that discussion, we can talk about times because we have to do something when everyone's available.
all right. Okay, that could get a little dicey, but you know, I'm sure we
Right.
can work it out. Okay.
Well, is
At the
that something Josh can coordinate for us?
So the only person who knows the names of the candidates is the HR generalist. Like, I don't know any of, I know candidates
I'm-
2, 3, 3, and
Right, I'm
12, and
getting, I'm very confused here. So the training session that we talked about was specifically just to talk about the process of how you
Yes.
interview a candidate. So that could be something that Josh could coordinate for us,
Oh,
correct?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, I apologize. I thought you
All
meant meetings
then-
with candidates.
And then within that meeting, you also talk about the process of how we're going to be setting up the interviews.
Yes.
There you go. So the people in the committee know exactly what they should be doing and how the process is going to be coordinated. And probably even at that meeting, they could talk about, you know, like if someone's going on vacation, this week
Yes.
doesn't work for me and things
Yes.
like that.
Absolutely.
We don't need
That
to
was-
talk about anything else.
Yes,
All right.
that was my understanding.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. We forgive me, Fred, but we don't need to talk about anything else within the process right here,
No.
right now. I
That's
think
correct.
we've done our job. We were tasked to at least get 3 candidates
Yep.
and tasked with the process. And we did talk about the process and no one had an issue with it. So
So that's that goes to the second stage, which is the actual interview committee, which Kim's office will help us to coordinate. And finally, it will appear before the full council as any other matter would, duly advertised, et cetera. And the council will likely need to, or may need to go to executive session if there's anything substantive to really be discussed.
Right.
Anything more than, I guess, just a vote to accept, you know.
Yep.
So, all right, then I think we have ironed out what the process should be going forward. I can't think of anything else that comes to mind right now. Except I guess we're going to need to reach out to Anne to actually check in with her, not only about availability, but her willingness to fulfill this role. I suspect she's going to be perfectly willing, but just so that we know going forward.
Oh, when she announced she was moving, I already laid down the groundwork, so. I said
Right.
she wasn't getting rid of us that easily. Just
And
when you're out, we pull you back in.
And at this point, it is getting complex. It's like three-dimensional chess here. So
Exactly.
okay, all right. Is there any further topic that we need to discuss tonight?
There's nothing we
Because
can,
that was
we
all
can't
on-
discuss anymore
Yeah,
tonight.
that's what the agenda was. We just covered it.
Then I think I would
Anyone from the public storming the castle that wants to say anything? No?
There are
No
no
one
members
here?
of the public.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that motion.
And I'll do a roll call vote. Sean
Yes.
and Frank,
Yes.
and I concur. We stand adjourned.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Have a great night.
Night.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Take care.